this is 100 on books. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up, and since I read quite a number of books in June, I have my trusty computer with Goodreads open here, and I'll be looking at it every so often. So the in June was Alice Munro's Dance with the Happy Shades, and my friend Raul really loves Alice Munro. I'll link his Goodreads in the description. And so when I saw this was available at the library, I had to borrow it, and whew, every short story is just chef's kiss. So highly recommended. I don't quite know how to review a short story collection, and also the sun is about to set. It's set, so like it's twilight in the tropics. So now I'm just gonna move to the next one. Not the tropics, the equator. The next book I finished was Where the Wild Things Are. I listened to this as an audiobook. I didn't read it as a child. I listened to it or whatever, and I listened to it. I remember on the day I listened to it, I was at the bank, and the telling was so good. I'm looking right now to see who the narrator is. Goodreads refuses to tell me who the narrator is, but the narrator is spectacular. If I had children, I'd get this for them. But maybe I'd get it for them, and then as an audiobook, so that the person who reads the version I listen to reads it for them, because that's it, spectacular. Next book I finished was The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls by Anissa Gray. I think I said this during my Media Freakout tag, but I absolutely love the characters in this book. I especially loved Viola because she was so complicated, and I love a complicated character. And so maybe I should talk a little bit about it. The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls follows this family in the wake of the matriarch of the family and her husband being jailed for fraud. And the family comes apart, but in some ways it comes together, and they find each other and, in a sense, repair and reform their family in the process. Really enjoyed it. The next book I read was This Family by Maisie Card, which follows this Jamaican American family, where, again, in the wake of the patriarch of both of those families revealing that he had faked his death, which led to his death in the first family. And so we see the complications that arise from finding out that the person you thought was your father, the person you thought was dead, is not. And then it spans multiple generations, multiple centuries. So we go back in time and we see all of these connections between all the different characters. And if you are the sort of person who likes a book that starts with a family tree, this is the book to read, because it starts with a family tree. So I really enjoyed that. The next one I read was The Things I Will Tell You, which is edited by Sabrina Mahfouz. This is a collection of writing by British Muslim women and women who have lived the British Muslim experience. It was short stories, there was a play, and there were also some poems. I don't really know how to experience poetry. I'm going to do a video at some point where I go over my goals for 2020, my reading goals for 2020, and one of them was to read poetry. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not doing very well on that, because poetry and me, I'm sorry, Rosie. My friend Rosie Olan is really a huge fan of poetry and such a fantastic reader of poetry, but it is not my thing. So I'm not gonna lie, I skipped over every poem, and I bet some of them are great, but the truth is that I borrowed this because Laila Bulela a piece in it, and so when I searched her name at the library, this came up. It was an interesting experience because some of the short stories are spectacular, but I don't want to say it was great or it was not great, because I didn't really experience it in its entirety. Then the next book I finished was Indistractable by Mir El. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. And it's a book about how to, really focus and harness your full powers of productivity. Anyone who knows me knows that this is probably not a good fit for me. I don't, again, remember where I borrowed this book, but I highlighted all of the great pieces of advice and then returned it because it was probably going to be useful for somebody else. I don't generally go in for self-help books because it's not my jam, but It has some great tips, which, as I said, I highlighted. So if they're sitting on my Kindle highlights, just waiting for when then the productivity, when I get in there. The next book I read was Maid by Stephanie Land. Hmm. Guys, I docked this from 2 stars to 1 star. Like, what was the point? But that's also how I feel about Inheritance. So, big, what was the point energy generally? Like, the point, what was it? The next book I read was El Deafo by Cece Bell. It's a graphic memoir of Cece Bell's childhood. Cece Bell got an infection as a child that led to her losing a lot of her hearing. So she needed a hearing aid, a giant hearing aid that she put around her neck. But it led her to have some special powers because she could hear her teacher wherever the teacher was. And because this is a graphic memoir also aimed at children, a lot of the laughs come from the fact that she could hear her teacher tinkling every time she went to the bathroom, and the number of times the teacher goes to the bathroom. And it was a really nice exploration of life as a young person with a disability, navigating the world, but also coming to terms with oneself. I greatly enjoyed it. The next book I finished was How We Get Free by that was edited by Kianga Yamata Taylor. It's a collection of interviews with some people from the Combahee River Collective, and then there's one last interview with this lady whose last name is Gaza. I'm sorry, I don't remember all her name. Who was part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And because it was interviews are very lightly edited, and it was people who I enjoyed, I felt like I was sitting in on their conversation, and I greatly enjoyed that. So, and it's also a really quick read, so it's a sort of thing that you would be done with in. I'm sorry. It's the sort of thing you'd be done with in. Okay, I was trying to figure out what the last book is. It's the sort of thing you'd be done with in a day and a half. But so much good content. And anyway, if you haven't read the Combahee River, if you haven't read the Combahee River Collective Statement, I'll put a link down below. But it's basically like formative black feminist. It's one of those formative black feminist texts, and it was so great to read interviews with the people who made it possible. The next book I finished was Nairobi Noir, edited by Peter Kimani. It's part of Akashic's Noir series. So if you don't know about this, it's a series of books that Akashic produces where they call forth an editor, and then this editor edits stories from, say, a country that have a noir theme. This was a mixed bag. There's a story in the book that I did not read at all because I have deplatformed the writer of that story. Don is sitting in the audience. He knows exactly who I'm talking about. His name is Redacted. And so that, in a sense, set the tone for how I dealt with the book. I deplatformed, DNF'd some of those stories because I think it was one of those things where, because I know Nairobi, I've lived in Nairobi almost all my life. Nairobi! I've lived here almost all my life, and so there are times when I'd read a story and it would just ring so hollow. But then when the story was good, it was great, I really enjoyed Faith Onair's story, Makeno Njerica, my good friend Dr. Kari Mose, and also the fantastic, wonderful, amazing Kevin Machiro's story. So all of those 4 stories were spectacular. I mean, sometimes I'm sitting in the house and I think of Dr. Mose's story and it's like, that did not happen. The thing she wrote about did not happen. But those stories are so almost visceral. Anyway, but as I said, when it's good, when it's not, I mean, for instance, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he wrote a story in that collection. Why? You know what I mean? I know this is almost treasonous to say, and come at me 100 on books on Twitter, 100 on books wherever you find me. Like, I said what I said. The next book I finished was Inheritance by Danny Shapiro. And less said about this, the better. 1 star. Next book I finished was Polar Vortex by Shani Mutu. Woo! Hermione! So in this book, we're following this lady called Priya, who's living in a part of Canada where there are like three POC, and she's one of the three. So really, a hot part of Canada, and she's living with her wife. And then this guy who was her friend in college, but who it turns out she had a sort of complicated relationship with, comes to visit her, and over maybe the span of 4 days, we have flashbacks and things happening in the moment that really complicate the story of what it means to be queer, what it means to be a lesbian, what it means to be a diasporic person, because Priya is originally Indo-Caribbean, she's from Trinidad, and the guy who's coming to visit her is originally from Uganda, also of the Indian diaspora. And so during this weekend, we see the fractures in her relationship, the stories she's told herself about herself and her past, and we really get to question whether or not those stories are true. So well handled. Please read it if you can. Next book I finished was Black Sunday by Tola Rotimi Abraham. This book follows a set of twins and their family as their family falls apart once their mother leaves them and their father goes off to do God knows what. And there's a pasta in the name of it. I enjoyed certain parts of this book and certain parts not so much. I think there was a story in there that maybe was not for me. It's very beautifully written. Abraham is an alum of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her language is fantastic, but I don't know. Sometimes not all books are for everyone, but very beautifully written. So go in for that, if nothing else. But I'm saying, like, probably good for you. The next book I finished was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I listened to this actually. This was the third book I listened to last month after Where the Wild Things Are and Inheritance. And in this, we are following, I bet you've seen it on BookTube or Bookstagram or Goodreads, but I'll just give you a short rundown of what's happening. We follow these two writers who are dealing with writer's block that's been caused by all the things that are happening in their life, and the way they decide to deal with this is by writing in each other's genres. One of them is her name is Jamari. Jamari is a romance writer, and Gus, her neighbor, is a literary fiction writer, but it feels more like he's a genre writer anyway. But so the two of them switch genres essentially and fall in love. It's not a spoiler. As I said, I listened to it. It was a very fast-paced book, but I must say now, maybe 2 weeks since I read it, I don't remember a single thing. So do with that what you will. But it was a fun read. It's as the title suggests, it is a beach read. Like wherever the beach is for you, it's winter for us right now. The closest thing we have to winter on the equator. So it's a warm read. The next book I finished was Tropic of Violence. Definitely top 10 this year. Natasha Apana. So good. I mean, the first book of hers I read was The Last Brother. And I remember I bought it. I was with Dawn actually. A lot of my life happens with Dawn, in case it's not obvious. I bought it in there's a second price section of this bookshop called Educate Yourself at a mall called Westgate Mall in Nairobi, and they had a section that was dedicated to basically books in translation. And during that time, I was like, well, since my French and Spanish study is basically going nowhere, please follow me on Duolingo if you can. I'll put Duolingo if you can. I'll put my Duolingo details in the I might as well read books in translation. I found her, and so anyway, I searched for her at my library. I'll put in a link to my library because you can be a member wherever you are in the world. And so when I found this book, how can a book, one book, be 160 pages and every single page is just chef's kiss? Um, so what happens in the story? In the story, we're following this young boy called Moise, whose mother Marie has just passed away very suddenly, and not at birth, but quite close to birth, by his white adoptive mother, and his birth mother, arrived on the island of Mayotte, off the coast of Comoros, and because he had heterochromia, his eyes are of different colors, she thought he was a jinn and gave him up. And then, so he grows up with Marie and lives a very comfortable life. But when she dies, his at loose ends. He falls in with a gang. The gang basically leads him to all sorts of violence, and the end is very tragic. This is not a spoiler. It's in the blurb. But the writing is so beautiful, and in a weird way, I feel like it was also very prescient because this book was published in French in 2016, and it was recently released by Grey Wolf Press in the US this year. But when it was published, this is the fact that um, the hospital in Mayotte being the site of immigration was not a major issue, or had not yet become a major issue. But I found out after reading this, because I didn't even know about Mayotte or the fact that it's part of the French Republic or any of those things. But I read up and I found out that in 2018 there was a whole push to make the hospital in Mayotte non-French territory, so that children born in that hospital do not gain French citizenship, because most 70% of the children born in that hospital are children of Comorans. And so just the way in which fiction in a sense can be almost prophetic, but in a lot of other senses can can be such a strong commentary on society and all the things that are warped about it is spectacular. I loved that book. If I had a physical copy, I'd press it into the hands of everyone, but since I don't, I'm just saying, please get yourself a copy if you can. And the last book I finished in June was The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagdar, and I haven't read YA in a while, so it was nice to get back into that world. And in this story, we are following um, Nishat, who's running a henna business, but another girl called Flavia is also running a henna business in the same form. They are both Irish students, and so they have a clash because Nishat feels that her culture is being appropriated, and Flavia is like, game is game, you know? I mean, and it was very nice listening to it because it's quite an intense book. I feel like you get really sucked into the universe of the book, and I enjoyed that. I found the story compelling. I mean, the bits about exploring culture, exploring what it means to be a Muslim lesbian, or to be bisexual, and I enjoyed that bisexuality was explored but without any biphobia. I enjoyed that. But on the other hand, I felt that there are some places where it fell flat, like for instance, temperatures would be said in Fahrenheit, and I know that Ireland is right off the coast of the UK. So a bit of me was like, why are we saying temperatures in Fahrenheit, or why are we calling money dollars, And I know that they have euros there. So some of that was probably just an editing issue, but the I love Nishat. I wish I could follow her forever. And I also really loved the relationship she had with her sister Pretty. I love strong, beautiful sibling relationships. So if that's your sort of thing, please go for it. Flavia, I feel, is a bit of a flat character. I know that a number of people on BookTube have really enjoyed this book, but I feel like it worked more as a sibling love story than it did as a romance, to be honest. But That's just me. Then I started Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sukegawa at the end of June, but I'll talk about this in my July wrap up. But I just want to say that was a most interesting story. So look out for that in the next wrap up. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, share, and follow in the socials, which I'll share in the description. And I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.